He had no name, no identification, no past that anyone could find. Only 2 words hidden in his pocket: Tamam Shud. Why? In 1948, on a quiet beach in Australia, a man was found lying against the sand. At first, nothing seemed unusual. No signs of violence, no struggle, no reason to suspect anything more than a natural death. But then, the details began to surface. Every label on his clothes had been removed. No documents, no way to identify who he was or where he came from. The autopsy revealed something even stranger. His body showed signs consistent with poisoning. Yet no poison was ever found. And then, a small piece of paper changed everything. Hidden inside a secret pocket were 2 words that would turn this case into one of the most enduring mysteries in history. Tamam Shud. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, a man was found lying on Somerton Beach, just outside the city of Adelaide, Australia. He was positioned against a seawall, his head resting gently as if he had simply fallen asleep. One arm lay by his side. The other was slightly raised, then dropped. At least, that's what some witnesses would later recall seeing the night before. At first, nothing about the scene suggested urgency. The beach was quiet. The man was well dressed, wearing a suit, polished shoes, and a neatly pressed shirt. To anyone passing by, he looked like someone resting after a long day. A few people had noticed him the previous evening, sitting in the same spot, unmoving. One witness even recalled seeing him lift his arm briefly before letting it fall back down. No one thought much of it at the time. It wasn't until morning that the stillness became suspicious. When authorities arrived, they found no immediate signs of violence. There were no visible injuries, no blood, no indication of a struggle. His face was calm, his posture undisturbed. It looked like a peaceful death, quiet, almost unremarkable. But then, the details began to shift that impression. There was no wallet, no identification, no personal belongings that could explain who he was or how he had ended up there. Even more unusual, every label on his clothing had been carefully removed, not torn, not damaged, deliberately cut out. It was a small detail, but it changed everything, because this was no longer just a man who had died on a beach. This was a man who could not be identified. Police began their initial checks, expecting a missing person report to match his description. But nothing came. No one stepped forward. No name connected to his face. No history that could be traced back to him. And yet, there was something else that didn't quite fit. His clothes were clean. His shoes showed no sign of wear from the sand. There was no evidence that he had walked across the beach for any distance. It was as if he had appeared there and then simply stopped. By the end of that first day, one thing had become clear. This was not going to be a routine case, because the man on Somerton Beach had left behind no identity, no explanation, and no obvious reason for his death. Only silence. The body was taken for examination shortly after it was discovered. At first, there was still a possibility that this had been a natural death, something sudden, something internal, something that left no visible trace. But as the autopsy began, that possibility started to fade. Externally, there was nothing unusual, no injuries, no signs of trauma, no indication that the man had been attacked or restrained. His hands were clean. His fingernails showed no defensive marks. Whatever had happened, it hadn't been a struggle. But internally, the findings told a different story. Several of his organs showed signs that were difficult to ignore. His spleen was significantly enlarged, far beyond what would be considered normal. His liver appeared congested, and there were indications of internal bleeding, particularly in the stomach. These were not random findings. They pointed in one direction: poison, or at least something very close to it. The symptoms matched what investigators at the time would expect from certain types of toxic substances, compounds that could disrupt the body without leaving obvious traces. Substances that, in some cases, were extremely difficult to detect, especially with the technology available in 1948. Toxicology tests were conducted, but nothing was found. No known poison, no identifiable substance, no clear cause of death. And that contradiction became the center of the mystery, because the body was telling one story, while the evidence was telling another. There were other details that raised questions as well. In his pocket, investigators found a pack of cigarettes, but inside the pack, the cigarettes didn't match the brand printed on the box. It was a small inconsistency, but in a case where almost everything had been stripped away, even the smallest detail mattered. There was no sign of vomiting, no indication that the man had tried to seek help, no disruption in his clothing that suggested panic or distress. If he had been poisoned, it had happened quietly, deliberately, and possibly with precision. By the time the autopsy was complete, one thing had become clear. This was not a simple death. The cause remained officially unknown, but the possibility of poisoning could not be dismissed, which meant the man on Somerton Beach had likely not died by accident. And if that was true, then someone, somewhere, knew exactly what had happened, but they weren't speaking. As investigators moved beyond the autopsy, the focus shifted to something even more unsettling. Who was this man? At first, the answer seemed like it would be simple. A well-dressed individual found in a public place, someone, somewhere, had to recognize him. Police circulated descriptions. His photograph was shared. His physical features were documented in detail, but the response never came. No missing person report matched him. No family came forward. No one claimed to know who he was. And then, the details of his belongings made the situation even stranger. Every label on his clothing had been carefully removed, not ripped, not worn away, cut out from his jacket, from his trousers, from his shirt. It was precise, intentional, systematic. Whoever had worn these clothes or prepared them had made sure that nothing could be traced back to a manufacturer, a store, or a country of origin. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Investigators continued searching for anything that could lead to an identity. Days later, that search led them to a railway station locker. Inside was a suitcase believed to belong to the same man. For a moment, it seemed like the case might finally move forward. But when the suitcase was opened, the same pattern appeared. Clothing, personal items, everyday objects, and again, labels removed. Every possible identifier had been taken out. There was one small exception. The name T. Keene appeared on a few items. But when police followed the lead, it led nowhere. No missing person, no confirmed connection. It was either a coincidence or something placed there intentionally. Even the man's physical characteristics added to the confusion. His teeth were unusually structured, details that dentists noted as uncommon. His body showed signs that suggested a particular lifestyle, possibly physical labor, yet his appearance and clothing suggested something else entirely. Nothing fully aligned. Fingerprints were taken and checked against available records, but there was no match. It was as if this man had never officially existed. No name, no history, no record. By this point, The investigation had moved beyond a simple question of identity, because this wasn't just a missing name. This was an identity that had been erased, and the more investigators looked, the clearer it became. This man had not only died without explanation, he had been made untraceable. For days, the investigation had been moving in circles. No name, no identification, no clear cause of death. Every path seemed to lead nowhere, until a detail, almost invisible, changed everything. As police re-examined the man's clothing, they noticed something unusual inside his trousers. A small, hidden pocket, carefully sewn into the fabric. Not something typically found in standard clothing. Inside it, there was a tightly folded piece of paper. It was small, worn, easy to miss. But what it contained would become the most important clue in the entire case. 2 words: Tamam Shud. A message? At first, the phrase meant nothing to investigators. It wasn't English. It didn't match anything in their immediate records. But as they began to search for its origin, a translation emerged. The words were Persian. Tamam Shud, meaning ended or finished. It was a strange message to carry, not written on a note, not part of a letter, but hidden, deliberately. And that raised a question that would define the case from that moment forward. Why would someone carry these words in a secret pocket? The paper itself added another layer to the mystery. It wasn't handwritten, it wasn't torn randomly. It had been cleanly removed from a printed page, which meant it had come from a book. Investigators began tracing the phrase, eventually linking it to a specific text, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry, philosophical, reflective, often centered around themes of life, death, and the passage of time. In that context, the phrase took on a different meaning, not just finished, but something closer to the end. And suddenly, the case no longer felt random. This was no longer just a man without a name. This was a man carrying a message hidden carefully, in a place designed not to be found. And if those 2 words were intentional, then this death might have been too, because from that moment on, the question was no longer just who he was, it was why. Those words were with him when he died. The phrase Tamam Shud had led investigators to a book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. But finding the source of the paper was only the beginning, because soon after, something unexpected happened. A man came forward. He told police that around the time the unidentified man had been found, he had discovered a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his car. He didn't know how it got there. He hadn't placed it himself. It had simply appeared. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. But when investigators examined the book, they found something that changed everything. The final page had been torn out, cleanly, precisely, exactly where the words Tamam Shud would have been printed. The torn edge of the page matched the small piece of paper found in the man's pocket. It was a perfect fit. For the first time, 2 pieces of the puzzle connected: the man on the beach and the book in the car. But the discovery didn't bring clarity. It made the mystery deeper. Because inside the back cover of the book, there was more. Indented into the surface were faint markings, letters that had been written with enough pressure to leave an impression. Not clearly visible at first, but when examined closely, they revealed a sequence. A series of capital letters arranged in lines, not words, not sentences, a code. Investigators immediately considered the possibility that this was some form of cipher, a hidden message waiting to be decoded. something that could explain who the man was or why he had died. Experts were consulted. Attempts were made to break the pattern, but nothing worked. The sequence resisted every effort. Even decades later, it remains unsolved. There was one more detail inside the book, a phone number, handwritten, carefully placed among the markings. For the first time, the investigation had something tangible, not just an object, but a possible connection to a real person, a lead. But like everything else in this case, it would not lead where anyone expected, because the book did not answer the mystery, it expanded it. Now, the case wasn't just about a man without a name. It was about a message that couldn't be read, a code that couldn't be broken, and a connection that had yet to be understood. And somewhere within all of it was the truth. The phone number found inside the book led investigators to a woman living not far from Somerton Beach. For the first time, the case had a direct connection to a real person, not a theory, not an object, someone who could be questioned. When police approached her, she appeared calm at first, cooperative, willing to answer basic questions, but as the conversation continued, something in her response began to shift. Because when she was shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, her reaction was immediate, subtle, but unmistakable. She recognized him, not openly, not directly, but enough that investigators noticed, and that moment would stay with them. The woman, later identified as Jessica Thompson, often referred to as Jestin, claimed she did not know the man. She denied any connection, said she had never seen him before. But there was a problem with that statement. The book. She admitted that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. Years earlier, she had given it to a man she knew, someone named Alfred Boxall, a soldier, someone she had corresponded with during the war. For a moment, it seemed like the case had found its answer. Police tracked down Boxall. If the book had belonged to him, then maybe the man on the beach was connected to him. But when Boxall was found, alive and well, he still had his copy of the book, untouched, complete, with the final page still intact, which meant the book found in the car belonged to someone else, and the connection to the woman remained unexplained. Investigators returned to her with more questions, but her answers didn't change. She denied knowing the man, denied any involvement, denied any explanation for how her phone number ended up inside that book. Still, the doubt remained, because her initial reaction could not be ignored, and neither could the fact that, out of all the possible leads in the case, this was the only one that connected the man to another human being, a single point of contact in an otherwise empty story. But it was a connection that refused to open, because whatever she knew, if she knew anything at all, she chose not to say it. And with that, the investigation moved forward, but not necessarily closer to the truth. By this point, the case had moved far beyond a routine investigation. There was no identity, no clear cause of death, a hidden message, an untraceable book, and a witness who may have recognized the victim, but refused to say how. Individually, each detail was unusual. Together, they suggested something else, something more deliberate. And in 1948, that possibility carried a very specific meaning. Because this was the beginning of the Cold War, a time when information mattered, when secrecy mattered, and when people disappeared without explanation. Adelaide, where the body had been found, was not just a coastal city. It was located near sensitive military and research facilities, areas connected to weapons testing, areas that at the time were closely guarded. And that raised a question investigators could not ignore. Was the man on Somerton Beach a spy? The theory wasn't based on a single piece of evidence. It was built from the pattern, the removal of all identifying labels, the absence of any official record, the possibility of a rare, undetectable poison, and the presence of a code that no one could understand. These were not random elements. They were consistent with something organized, controlled, possibly trained. Even the smallest details began to take on new meaning. The way the man was dressed, the fact that his appearance didn't fully match his physical characteristics, the sense that he didn't belong to a single clear background. It all pointed in one direction, but there was a problem. No government ever claimed him. No intelligence agency confirmed any involvement. No document surfaced to support the theory. And yet, the idea remained. Because if he was a spy, then his identity would have been protected, his death unacknowledged, and the truth intentionally hidden. But if he wasn't, then all of these details still needed an explanation. Because whether it was espionage or something else entirely, this was not an ordinary life, and it was not an ordinary death. The man on Somerton Beach had left behind too many signs of intention, too many pieces that didn't fit by accident, which meant one thing: whatever happened to him was planned. The only question was, by whom? As the investigation continued, one expectation still remained. At some point, someone would recognize him. The man's photograph had been circulated across Australia. Newspapers published his image. Police shared his physical description in detail. His height, his build, the structure of his face, everything that could help identify him was made public. But no one came forward. Not a friend, not a colleague, not a family member. No one claimed to know who he was. And as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, that silence became something else. It became part of the mystery. Because it wasn't just that the man had no identification, it was that he seemed to have no connection to anyone at all. Investigators expanded their search internationally. Records were checked, missing persons databases were reviewed, even military and immigration files were considered. Still, nothing, no match, no record, no explanation. The physical details only made the situation more confusing. His teeth, for example, showed unusual characteristics, features that some dental experts noted were rare. His body suggested a certain level of fitness, possibly someone who had been physically active or trained. But his clothing told a different story, refined, formal, carefully chosen. Two different impressions, neither one fully complete. Fingerprints were taken and distributed. But again, there was no match in any known database at the time. It was as if the man had lived outside of every system that could identify him. And that idea began to settle in. Because this was no longer just a missing identity. This was the absence of identity. A man whose face could be seen by thousands, but recognized by no one. Even in death, he remained unknown. And that raised a question that investigators could not answer. Was this a failure to identify him, or had he been living in a way that made identification impossible? Because in a world where records exist, where people leave traces, where lives connect, this man had left nothing behind. No history, no name, no one to remember him, only a face. And even that meant nothing to anyone. For decades, the case remained open, not actively solved, but never forgotten. The man on Somerton Beach became one of Australia's most enduring mysteries, a case revisited again and again by investigators, journalists, and eventually independent researchers. Because even as time passed, the questions never went away. And then, years later, something changed. Technology. What couldn't be done in 1948 was now possible. Fragments of evidence that once seemed insignificant were re-examined. Among them, something that had been preserved for decades, a strand of hair, carefully stored, protected. At the time, it had offered no answers, but now it held a new possibility. DNA. Researchers began working to extract genetic material, hoping to build a profile that could finally identify the man. It wasn't simple. The sample was old, degraded, limited, but it was something. One of the key figures behind this effort was Professor Derek Abbott, a researcher who became deeply involved in the case. Over time, he collected records, analyzed patterns, and followed leads that had been overlooked or dismissed. But his approach was different. He wasn't just looking at the evidence, he was looking at connections, possible family links, possible descendants, genetic matches that could point not directly to the man himself, but to people related to him. And slowly, a direction began to form. It wasn't a clear answer, not yet, but for the first time, the case was moving forward, not based on speculation, but on data. Science had reopened a mystery that had once seemed impossible to solve. And with that came a new question. After all these years, after decades of silence, was the truth finally within reach? Or would this case, like so many others, reveal just enough to keep the mystery alive? Because even with modern tools, modern methods, and renewed attention, the man on Somerton Beach remained unidentified, but not for much longer. In 2022, after more than 70 years, the case reached a turning point. For decades, the man on Somerton Beach had remained unknown, a face without a name, a story without an ending. But now, there was a possibility. Using advanced DNA analysis, researchers were finally able to build a genetic profile from the preserved evidence. It wasn't easy. The sample had aged, the material was limited. But through careful reconstruction and comparison, a pattern began to emerge. A name: Carl Charles Webb. According to the findings, Webb was a man from Melbourne, born in the early 1900s, an electrical engineer, someone who had lived a relatively quiet life, at least on the surface. For the first time, the man on the beach was no longer completely anonymous. But the answer didn't bring closure. It raised new questions, because even if the identity was correct, it didn't explain what had happened. There was no clear record of how Webb had ended up in Adelaide, no confirmed timeline connecting his life to the final moments on Somerton Beach, and perhaps most importantly, no explanation for the details that had defined the case from the beginning. The removed labels, the hidden message, the coded writing, the connection to the woman. None of it fit neatly into the life of an ordinary engineer. There were also uncertainties surrounding the identification itself. While the DNA analysis pointed strongly in one direction, not all experts agreed on its finality. Some considered it highly likely. Others remained cautious, because in a case like this, even strong evidence can leave room for doubt. Still, the impact was undeniable. After decades of mystery, the man had a possible name, but not a story. And that distinction mattered, because knowing who he might have been was not the same as knowing what happened to him, or why. The identity brought the case closer to an answer, but it did not solve it. Because the Somerton man was never just about a name. It was about everything that remained unexplained, even after the name was found. And in that sense, the mystery was still alive. After more than 70 years, the man on Somerton Beach may finally have a name, but the story is still incomplete. Because the identity, if it is correct, answers only one question: who he might have been. It does not explain why he died, or how he died, or what led him to that beach on that night. The details that defined the case from the very beginning remain unchanged. A man with no identification, clothing stripped of every label, a hidden message placed where it was never meant to be easily found, a book connected to a code that no one has been able to read, and a woman who may have recognized him but never said how. Each piece still exists, but they don't come together, not completely. And maybe that's what makes this story different, because most cases move in one direction, from mystery to answer, but this one never did. Even as new evidence emerged, even as science advanced, even as a possible identity was finally revealed, the core of the mystery remained untouched. Why? Why remove every trace of identity, only to leave behind a message? Why carry words that mean the end in a hidden pocket? Why create a trail that leads nowhere? There are theories, there are explanations, but none of them are complete. And so, the case remains open, not officially, but in every sense that matters. Because the man on Somerton Beach is no longer entirely unknown, but he is not fully understood, and maybe he never will be. Some stories are solved, others are only revealed in fragments. Next on True Echoes. A mother went on television and asked the world for help. She said her children had been taken, a carjacking, a stranger, a desperate search. The story spread quickly. People believed her. Police searched for answers. But something didn't feel right. Because as the investigation continued, the details began to change. And the truth was far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because this time, the question was not just what happened. It was why the story was told the way it was. Next on True Echoes, the Susan Smith case. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. And sometimes, even after decades, the truth doesn't disappear. It just stays out of reach. What do you think happened to the Somerton man? Was this a case of espionage or something even more personal? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.